So would you join me in welcoming Florence Muindi with Life in Abundance?
Often something that brings us to our knees and gets us on a new path comes with a feeling of failure. As a medical doctor with my strong-willed personality, I went out 22 years ago into the mission field with a desire to change the plight of the poor and the vulnerable, a zeal to make an impact in the world that we live in today. Then after 3 years of hard work, Christmas Eve of 1999 brought me to my knees. I discovered that you need to get there for Christ to begin to be exalted. By then, I was running a vulnerable children ministry that was involving 400 children, and we were planning for a pre-Christmas vacation Bible school. I also had a community-based medical care, and I was looking at the leprosy affected, targeting 4,000 people in this very destitute community. Plus, I had a family. I was taking care of 2 toddlers and a husband, and we were in a cross-cultural situation. But the urgent matter was Vacation Bible School, and I woke up very early on this wet, cold, misty morning to go from bakery to bakery looking for enough bread for the event that was going to be held the afternoon of the next day. As I drove back to our home coming from the shopping spree, I came upon what completely shocked me. Children ages 6, 7, 10, shivering in the cold, just a block away from our missions house, going through a trash pit, looking for something to eat at 6 a.m. My heart was broken. I fought back the idea to bring them back to our house so that they can live in the garage or something. I began to think maybe I can bring an orphanage. Maybe I can bring more resources to our house for these children to be cared for from there. How do you witness that on Christmas Eve and continue? I battled with these ideas for several days. Then it came to my realization that this could not go on. I resolved that I wasn't going to be the one taking charge. I wasn't going to be the one giving bread or continuing the medical ministry that was happening or even continuing with the Vacation Bible School that at this point was going out of hand. It just all had to stop. I would be no longer the one taking charge. It had to be the local church taking responsibility. I switched gears. This new strategy that I began to implement from then on would bring response to the least of these that lifts up the church. It enables her to be relevant so that Christ can increase as I decrease. It helps the vulnerable and the poor to own their own development. It bestows dignity to the least of these that Jesus refers to as his brothers. It deals with systems that continue to affect the areas where we serve, that people can be set free and others can be prevented from falling into the same predicament. I found that it's not as easy as taking charge. It's not as easy as giving bread. It's more than that. I will tell you about that strategy in a few minutes, but first I want to emphasize the implementation of this approach is in partnership with the local churches, the bride of Christ. It's equipping her to lead and own the process of transformation in these communities and completely taking the work over. After Life in Abundance, our ministry has only been there for 3 years. We would be going in with an exit strategy from the beginning. After exit, it's normal to wonder, what happens? What happens 15 years later, 14 years later, 3 years later after we have been and left. As an organization, we do not continue to ask for reports, official reports from communities where we've worked for these 3 years and left. But we had been involved in these communities and relationships, and we had information that development was going on. But with other stakeholders, we were wondering just how much is going on? And to what extent is that impact sustained? Has it been worth it? And especially for me, where I have put my life on the line, has it been worth my life sacrifice to be involved in these communities for 3 years and leave and continue to serve others? To put all that speculation to rest, last year we braved the unknown, and in partnership with our donors, we commissioned a study by an outside independent US-based organization to come and do an evaluation. Their task was to pick up 2 of our target nations, go through a list of all the communities that we have served in those nations for the last 21 years, and pick up 6 communities randomly and look at the work of Life in Abundance and the impact it has after we have left. First, they were to show quantifiable data that evaluates the model in the short term, but also in the long term. With data, this evaluation was to answer the hypothesis that the transformational development model that we implement through the local church in a community has resulting development that can be sustained and expanded by the same community after we have left. It took courage to invite an outsider to look at our work. So they came, and after picking 6 communities, they evaluated the sustainability, and they were looking at 6 programmatic areas. They looked at economic empowerment, community health. They looked at education in reference to the early childhood development. They also looked at the environmental impact, the social engagement. And then lastly, they looked at spiritual transformation. The team was also evaluating the levels of impact, and they were looking at the beneficiaries that we initially started with. And they were also looking at how did these beneficiaries impact the community where they live. And then lastly, they were looking, could these beneficiaries have exported this work beyond the community where they live? They were measuring impact after several years of us having left. Not just the output or even the outcome, but the long-term impact. It was comprehensive. They produced a very thorough 53-page report. And to our great joy and my greatest relief, first, they realized that there was sustained impact on the initial recipients of the model. Our target beneficiaries were sustainably transformed after we had been there for 3 years. And on top of that, there was sustained impact in the community where the recipients lived. They had affected their neighboring population with an impact after we had exited. This was the case in all the communities that were evaluated by this outside group. Additionally, in 3 of these evaluated sites, the local partners had actually exported the program, replicated the same projects into new communities, expanding the work beyond the areas where we had worked. This model totally contravenes conventional development. It contravenes humanitarian work in which impact is expected to dissipate after the developer leaves. My favorite finding, which was a surprise to the researchers, was that there is a noticeable ripple effect of impact within the community, actually continuing to increase over time rather than dissipating. There you have it. I was personally amazed, but not surprised, because God leads and he leads well. Let me share a couple of stories with you, and come with me to Muindi. It's a community in Kenya which has a population of over 50,000 people. It's marginalized, and they live on a semi-arid area prone to famine. Water and food was in shortage when we got there. Actually, what attracted us to serve in this community was when the local church members who met us on our initial site visit told us that they routinely harvest grain and sell it at throwaway prices to middlemen, and they don't have a choice because whatever grain they keep, it spoils because of weevil infestation. And then they end up buying the same grain from these middlemen during the dry season at such high prices that they were getting poorer each season. They attracted us to be involved in this kind of food security and water security, that they can have sustained development. And together we established church-based grain silos to enable them to store their harvest. We gave them a $500 startup fund to build these silos and to buy grain from their community so they can fill up their silos. We also started a revolving loan where the members could borrow and invest in income-generating activities and pay back the loan. This would enable them to meet their own felt needs and own their own development as they build up on food security. Well, the researchers went back to this community after we had left several years later. And they found stories like that one of Joshua and his vegetable farm, as evidence of that ongoing ripple effect. Additionally, the revolving fund that started with just $500 had by this time more than $10,000 in the bank. Plus, there were investments and loans that had been given out, valued at more than $20,000. Multiple silos stood in the churches and in the neighboring areas as a practice that was being replicated of food storage, food security in place. Joshua himself is a second-generation beneficiary and a member of this community who was actually trained by the people that Life in Abundance had trained during our 3-year stay in this community. Well, join me also in Markato, a community in the slums of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. What attracted us to partner with this local community was that there was a high prevalence of street children. The churches opened a joint drop-in center, and together, over a 3-year period, we discipled a cohort of 250 vulnerable children. We modeled rehabilitation and development using education skills and economic activities, restoring the hope and dignity of these children. The study found that after we had left, the initial beneficiaries had not only continued to thrive, but they reached out further in partnership with local churches to do similar programs within the community. And some of the former street boys had become model businessmen, had become teachers, had become church leaders, just an evidence of transformation that sustained. You know, the Ethiopian government recognized the success of this program and gave a national award for this strategy in the area of orphans and vulnerable children work. The study report concluded with 3 points, and I quote: first, the community work facilitated by Life in Abundance continues to flourish even after Life in Abundance is no longer present. And then second, in all the 3 sites visited, in all the 6 sites visited, there was no question that the people were engaged in effective and transformative ways to bring change to their communities. And then over and over, we heard in their own words, our eyes have been opened. And then lastly, the report concluded, to achieve this transformational change, a holistic model of development is essential. The components of LIA's developmental model all work together, addressing the whole person, and none can be isolated to achieve this success. The interdependencies were evident across all sites in deep and complex levels. All this is quoted from the study. Well, several minutes ago, I promised I would share this model with you, and here are the highlights. We go into a community. We start by prayer walking in that community. Then we bring together people of peace, strategically placed in those communities from the local churches. And those who buy in after the vision seminar become the resource persons who are trained, who are equipped to begin with a baseline survey, a participatory survey that helps them to identify what are the key needs. And together we begin a journey over the next 3 years that addresses the felt needs and models transformational development in ways that these ones can replicate it in other places and they can own their own development. We work in the areas of community health, education, economic empowerment, and social engagement through the local church. We are not a relief agency. We do not just run a couple of projects. We are interested in the whole transformation of the people that Jesus has allowed us to serve with. We care for the long-term development of people and what God has called the church to fulfill, his plan for his people. And we say prayer is key because we download this from the throne itself. We stay focused on the poor, the vulnerable, to involve them to identify sustainable solutions for their needs. For lasting change, personal and local ownership of these development solutions is essential. We ensure their buy-in. We ensure that they participate. And we ensure that we are approaching the felt priority needs that they themselves have identified. This is who we partner with, the local church. That she can become obedient to her God-given mandate. They are the change agents. They are the salt and light. And they are the ones who can use this systematic approach to bring about a lasting transformation that honors Christ in line with Isaiah 61. And it's over the 3 years that we begin to disciple her to take full control and that she can step into place as we exit. This has been the whole Life in Abundance ministry philosophy for the last 21 years. And it's not simply a strategy. It is a passionate call to disciple nations and to usher in the kingdom of God. Amen.